welcome all of you and thank you for joining us on a Thursday night. We're really excited to help share some best practices and advice for the college application process generally, with particular focus on how you can approach the Common Application. And so just before we start, I wanted to include a couple things that we've noticed that help make these types of events really engaging and fun. So be active in the chat, ask questions, be respectful and supportive of others, and also make sure to sign up for Leland. So we're going to start by getting to know our panelists, a little bit about the Leland platform. And then after that, we'll go into an overview of the application process, as well as some question and answer from our expert panel. So to start us off, just to introduce myself, my name is Emma. I'm a member of the Leland team, a current undergrad at Stanford. So I went through this process a few years ago, so it's still pretty fresh in my mind. You'll also see Erica and Savannah in the chat sharing some links, and our CEO is John. He might stop in later on the event. And next, I would like to pass it off to our incredible panel. Bruce, would you start off and introduce yourself to the group?
Sure, I'm Bruce, and I went undergrad to Brown, and I went to grad school at Johns Hopkins, got a master's in art history, and I've had a career in copywriting for advertising and marketing firms, and then I moved into marketing for higher education schools, graduate schools and undergraduate, and I've been doing the alumni interviewing for Brown for a long time. And I found my calling doing this and helping high school students find the story that really represents them and puts them in the best light in front of their college admissions officers. So that's it.
Great. Francesca, would you mind introducing yourself? And then we'll go to Ishan afterwards.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. My name is Francesca. I'm a Princeton undergrad and recently got my MBA at Harvard. Like Bruce, I'm also in the marketing space. I run my own marketing and strategy consulting firm where I work with small business and startup leaders to shape the stories of their businesses. And I really view that storytelling expertise as something that's crucial in the college application process. There are so many similarities between how you promote yourself, how you tell a story about you, and how you tell a story about your business. So I really like to bridge those two things in my coaching. Like Bruce, I've also been an alumni interviewer for Princeton, and love working with students and helping them figure out, okay, what does this next step look like? It's a really exciting time in your life. It's a really big change, and I'm really, here to support you in it.
Great. Ishan, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Nice to meet everyone. Kind of like Emma, I went to Stanford twice. I did my undergrad there and finished up my MBA. I'm based here in the Bay Area. And I have been involved in college admissions basically since I got into Stanford for college. My younger brother asked me for advice. What should he do? How should he apply? His interests were in medicine and mine were in entrepreneurship and business. So I ended up interviewing 50 of my classmates from Stanford and from other schools and writing a book called The Applicant. And that was mostly for him. He didn't read it, and but other people did read it. They bought the book. They wanted to learn more. And that's kind of how I got into my journey around admissions. Those students didn't want to read their book, but their parents wanted them to read the book. And so they would reach out to me and ask me for advice. This was in 2009, 10, 11, 12. And so I started helping students out of my passion, kind of like Francesca and Bruce said, for writing and framing people's interests, but also a journey that I had gone through. So I've helped students for many years now with GPAs ranging from 1 to 4, even below 1, applying to all schools. But my interest and passion has mostly been in the undergrad space to top 100 US colleges. I've helped students apply to all of them. And yeah, so that's kind of my background. I'm excited to speak to you all today.
Well, that's incredible. And it's clear we have 3 experts with us today. So yeah, I'm excited to dive into it. But before we do that, I'd love to know a little bit more about our participants. So if you guys wouldn't mind just quickly typing in the chat, where are you dialing in from, what year are you in school, and what your dream schools are. Okay, cool. Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, we'll let you guys look at those in the chat. But yeah, fun to see that we have folks from a lot of different places. And just to give you all an overview of Leland too as a platform, just because I know not all of you will be familiar with it going in, but just at a glance, like we are a platform to help high school students, college students, like all of you, reach their goals. And one of the ways that we do that is by matching high school students to coaches like Bruce, Francesca, and Ishan with incredible coaches. And we've done that for quite a few students, as you can see by these numbers. We have over 250 coaches on our platform, over 10,000 members of our communities, and we've raised $5 million from top venture capital firms. And a thing that's important to note about Leland is that even though we're a relatively new company, our coaches have over 30 years of experience getting students into every top school and program. So we're lucky to be able to leverage their expertise on our platform. And to show you guys how Leland works, I'm just going to share a little, give you a quick demo of our website. But if you go here to joinleland.com, you select your goal and your category, and then it'll take you to a list of our incredible coaches. You can see Bruce here, who's on the call, and it's really easy. Let's say I'm interested and I want to talk to him more about potentially scheduling time to talk about my application. I would just send him a message here and make sure to request an intro call. So just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of that. But yeah, and that's just like quick overview of like what Leland is and how it works. And so in addition to one-on-one coaching, we have communities for undergrad, for MBA, for whatever goal you're aspiring toward, and also small group classes. And if some of you saw at the beginning of this webinar, Bruce, for example, is hosting a small group class. One really good example of how Leland works in practice is one of our customers, Victor, who came to us in August of last year looking for help with his Stanford application. We matched him with a coach named Drake, who turned out to be a really good fit. And this year, Victor is starting at Stanford. And as you can see from this testimonial, he loved Drake, and Drake really served as not only someone to help him with his application, but as a support system, because as all of you know, this is a long process with ups and downs. So yeah, just an example. And we know that all of you could benefit from spending time with a coach. And so make sure to use this discount code for $25 in free coaching credit. for every attendee of this event. And so now we're going to dive into the topic of this event, which is applying to college, and more specifically the Common App. And so a lot of you guys know this, but as a broad overview, it is a pretty daunting process. So how could we break that down and say, okay, what are the most important things for us to be thinking about? At its core, it's really a combination of a strong academic record as shown through grades and test scores, demonstrated leadership and engagement within your school community, sort of activities and awards, the recommendation of others, whether that be teachers, counselors, mentors, and finally your essays, both the supplementals and your personal statement. And also in the chat, I'd love to hear what you guys think are the most daunting aspects of the application process, maybe what you're a little bit more nervous about. Yeah, and so, yeah, feel free to do that at any point, and then maybe we can try to comment on that, or our coaches also and panelists feel free to respond. And to kick us off, maybe I'll start with Francesca and then go to Bruce and then Ishan. What's your best tip for applying to your dream school?
Thanks, Emma. I just want to start this off by saying that I don't know if you all have heard about the Supreme Court case that's being heard right now, the Students for Fair Admissions litigation, but a lot of that Supreme Court case has unveiled what goes on behind doors of admissions committees, particularly at places like Harvard. And that has really sort of had me thinking about, all right, what do universities want? What are their incentives, and how do you put together an application that fits with what that is? When I think about a tip for applying to your dream school, there are two things that I think about along these lines. So one thing that universities really care about is their US News and World Report score, their ranking. And something that comes out of that is yield. To universities, to colleges, having a really good yield is really important. It affects a whole bunch of things, including potentially their credit, the credit that they can access. So the more you can demonstrate to them that you really want to go there, the better. And so I think about this in two ways. The first is if there's any kind of early decision or early application option, I would go with that. That is number one for your dream school. And then the second is that if you go to events, if you go to info sessions, if you go to tours, if you sign up for emails, click through on those emails. When you get those emails, the universities are tracking that, and they can sort of see how much of a demonstrated interest are you giving their school. And if they think that you're more likely to accept, then they might be more likely to extend an offer.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And just for those that don't know, I know in high school, I was confused about what yield meant, but that just means that like, if you get an offer for a school, you actually go. But yeah, that's a really, really great tip.
So I would, something that's similar, but a little different to that is, if you're thinking about your dream school and you want to get it, like, think about what really is your dream school, because a lot of this process is really making the right match. So understand who they are, where they're coming from, because they're looking to build a community. And, each school has somewhat of a different culture, and they want to understand that you are a good match for them. So, it's very easy. And I know plenty of kids who have just said, okay, 5 of the Ivies and Stanford, right? But they haven't really thought it through in terms of, kind of as Francesca said, why are those schools going to be interested in you? How is the match going to work? So if you think that through and you look at departments and you do your research, then I think you'll have a better sense of really where you belong, where you fit. And I think the more you are applying to schools where it's a good match, I think, you know, that will improve your chances of getting in, and it will also show that you'll be happier once you're there.
Yeah, that sounds good. I can jump in. I guess my first advice is don't have a dream school. When I work with students, I have safety, targets, and reaches. So 3 different levels of schools based on their rough chances of getting in. But a lot of students will come and say, hey, I really want to go to MIT or Stanford or like one particular school that usually has a 5% acceptance rate. And the best students I work with might have a 15% shot at that school, 3 times the average or 4 times, but that's still 1 in 5. And so my advice to most students is, okay, just have a bucket of schools that are your reaches. Sometimes we even create super reaches if students are applying to 15 plus schools. And beyond that, of course, just find out what each school really, why do you want to go there? So research, what are the clubs at the school that you want to be a part of? What's the culture of the school? What are specific classes and professors you want to work with? You'd be surprised how many students will tell me their dream school, but can't identify 3 professors that they want to take a class with there. And if I don't see that in the essay for a lot of these schools, I'll say, okay, the reason you're applying is just like the reason, 20 other people are applying. So why will you be the top 1 or 2 students to be selected? So that's like a practical tip. But my major point is have a bucket of schools instead of focusing on 1 or 2, especially if they're, the chances in general are less than 10%.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just to reiterate a little bit what Bruce was saying, I think when I was a high school student, my general idea was like, oh, I don't have a dream school, but I'm just going to apply to like the top 30, some variation of that, and see which one I end up in. And I did more research at the end, but I think it is really important to be intentional about seeking out, okay, what are the differences between these schools that I'm interested in? Because take Stanford and Berkeley, for example, very different schools, even though they're in the same bucket of like, top schools in the Bay Area. One is much smaller, it's easier to change your major. The housing situation is very different at both schools. And so it is a pretty important next step in your life. So yeah, I would just encourage all of you guys to do as much research as you can, because not only will it pay off in your application and will the admissions readers like be able to see that, but it's also just important for you to know what is the school that you're going to be the most happy at the end. And so I'll give this question to Francesca first, but for schools that require letters of recommendation, how do you suggest students prep recommenders or start thinking about that?
Sure. I think there's a really structured process that you can go through, starting with, okay, who are you even going to ask? And in an ideal world, you want to ask people with whom you have a great relationship or who are going to be able to speak to what you can do in a really positive way. So I guess my tip number 1 is think carefully about who those people are in your life and figure out who's going to be able to speak well and who's going to be able to speak well to your skills and to your strengths in relationship to the rest of your application. Don't think of your recommenders don't think of your letters of recommendation as being a separate entity from the rest of your application. You want to be telling a cohesive story, and you want your letters of recommendation to amplify that story. I would set up a meeting with your recommenders and discuss the colleges that you're interested in applying to and explain the direction of your applications. Talk through with them the themes that you're thinking about reinforcing throughout your essays, what college major you're thinking about, what types of schools you're thinking about, All of this to give your recommenders a really good understanding of what you're going to be articulating. And then this might be the most important part. I would jot down a series of notes or anecdotes that you want them to hit on. And this really empowers you. You're not writing, let me be very clear, you are not writing your own letter. You should never do that. But if you can start to give them a couple of talking points of things that you want them to hit on or things that you want to remind them of, because they might not remember all of the great things that you've done, that they know that you've done. But if you can give them that list of talking points, you can have a little bit more control over the narrative that you're going to be shaping through your essays and the rest of your application, and then making sure that those themes are going to echo through and get amplified through your letters of recommendation.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of that that's helpful is a lot of times these teachers are going to have, let's say, 30 or 40 students, if you're at a public school, asking them for a letter of rec. So you want to make sure that you're intentional about setting up a meeting with them and communicating to them that, you know, this process is really important to you. And there are certain things that you care about, like coming through in your letter. Like I remember I applied to a lot of colleges as an economics major. And even though I hadn't taken, you couldn't take that class junior year of high school where I went, I sort of asked my history teacher to talk about how I had sort of gone above and beyond in that subject in her history class, because I knew that was an important part of my application, was to show like a demonstrated interest in economics. So you also don't have to go exactly by the book in terms of, oh, they're my math teacher, they can only talk about math. Yeah, those are some great points, Francesca. And so now we're going to pivot a little bit into essays, because in terms of crafting your common application, that's arguably the hardest part. And so I'm sure you guys are familiar with these, but if not, I thought we just share the essay prompts for this year. And I imagine our panelists will hit on this, but one thing just to note with these essay prompts is that they're meant as a guide. In fact, if you look at the 7th prompt, it is essentially write about whatever you want to write about, but they can be helpful in brainstorming and maybe framing some ideas that you have. And so next, I'd love to ask you, Bruce, when you're working with a student on this personal statement, on the Common App essay, how do you help them brainstorm a topic when it is so open-ended?
Okay, well, actually, I try not to use the word topic because that feels a little too academic. I try to think of it as telling a story. And the way we start generally is, you know, what you had on the previous slide with the prompts, but not to go in the sense of choosing one, but looking at all of them and trying to get a sense of really what they're looking for. Like, what's the purpose of the personal statement as kind of shown here? And I kind of highlight some of the words that are in here, in those things like lessons and obstacles and outcome and reflect, new understanding, personal growth. So really try to come from the perspective of, you know, of the reader and the purpose of this. And really the schools are looking to see how to get a sense of how you'll be as a student. So assuming, you know, so many of the people who apply have the academic chops to do well, you know, the schools want to get a sense of how you will be a member of their community and how you will do the things that you do in college, from, you know, from when you arrive as a freshman to when you graduate. What are you doing? You're learning in the classroom, but you're also growing as a person, and you're looking to, you know, you will be changing in those 4 years. So I think they're really, if you look at the prompts, you get a sense that they're trying to see how you learn, grow, and change. And so I try to then work from that understanding to finding a story that everybody has, or that, you know, the individual story that each individual has, that really kind of shows who they are in terms of growth. And giving a sense to the reader, the admissions officer, of what it would be like to run into that person on the quad, and feel good that, oh, this is an interesting person who's a good person, more or less, and who's going somewhere, and that feels right. So, it's adding that dimension that your grades and board scores are not necessarily going to show. It's kind of who you are as a person, what your story is. So, and then really it's a question of talking that through. Is, everybody says like, oh, I'm not interesting. I got nothing going on. But then you talk, and if you ask the right questions, people discover like, oh, this is why I love music so much. Or, oh yeah, even though I have a learning disability, I've really learned so much. And so it's kind of getting those, digging a little bit deeper, and always deeper. And it's the onion, kind of always peeling away those layers to find out who the person is, what makes them tick, and how interesting that really is, because everybody is so interesting. And so many 17-year-olds don't believe that, but it's true. And so it's kind of finding that story in the context of what admissions officers are trying to find out about you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of 17-year-olds think that it has to be this momentous, pivotal period of their life or something really big that's happened to them. But yeah, I think some of the best stories are about those more subtle things. Ishan, do you have anything to add here? Maybe how you help students brainstorm for what they're going to write about?
Yeah, sure. This is usually the hardest essay. We usually start with it around August, September with students, because you have 7 prompts. It's just overwhelming for a lot of students. So what I usually do with them is, usually there's 1 or 2 that really stick out from 1 to 6, as in, hey, I have some idea of what to write, so let me try that. So we will rapid fire 2 or 3 of those different essays, trying to come up with ideas, just a sketch of the outline of the essay. So they'll come up with, hey, this is what I want to write about. This is my thesis. These will be my main points. What do you think? And then once we do that, we'll try to identify trends. Usually there's something that the student is trying to say through all of the essays, through different prompts. And what ends up happening usually is most of the students I work with end up writing number 7. So we'll combine the best parts of some attempts at 1 to 6, whether that's 2 and 4, or number 3 is one often somebody has like a particular idea about, they'll write, and we'll try to broaden it to who that person is, because ultimately that's what this prompt is about. It's, okay, I have 15 minutes to review your application. I'll spend 5 on this essay and maybe 2 or 3 on the supplements, and then I'll try to make a decision. So it's an important essay. That's why I usually spend, more time on this than some of the supplements even. And it's a good way to get students kind of in the flow, what to write about next for the supplements. So that's my approach to this one.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And how someone summed it up to me once that I thought was helpful is that in an ideal world, your Common App is an essay that if I don't know, there's a copy of it lying on the street and like your friend or someone that knew you well picked it up and it didn't have your name on it, like they would be able to immediately tell that it was you that wrote it. So just an essay that like really shows who you are like as a person, sort of like what Bruce was saying. And Francesca, how do admissions officers evaluate these essays, since it's not necessarily directly tied to an academic achievement or anything like that? How do you think they're thinking about it within the context of the overall application?
Well, I will preface this by saying I've never been an admissions officer. So in my experience, I think the essays that have an emotional storytelling component that really speak more to the emotional side rather than to the analytical side, that really show what the student's values are, who the student is, are the ones that are a lot more compelling Ishan spoke to the amount of time that admissions officers are spending on the personal essays. And I think that goes back to what we've been discussing, that especially at certain very competitive schools, there's an assumption that everyone has the academic chops. And the personal essays are a way of really distinguishing candidates from one another. And so it really is a very important part of that application, the entire application.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's almost like there's the initial screen of academics, but then you have to get to the personal essay to kind of get to the next stage. For this next question, I'd love to have all three of our panelists answer just briefly, but what is an example of a really great personal statement that you've seen? And like maybe what was the strength of that essay, like what made it great in your eyes? So maybe we'll start with Ishan on this one.
Yeah, there's sometimes every student has that within them. So I'm going to say that every student can write an amazing essay. Sometimes it's the students that are most unsure of themselves that end up with the best essays because they put in that much time to make sure that the essays really are a reflection of who they are. But some of the tools that I've seen students use, so I statements, so I feel this way, or I reacted this way because of this, makes essays more personal, and those have been a good tool that students have used in the past. Very strong topic sentences and thesis sentences. Like I said, a lot of the schools will skim over these essays, so structuring it with shorter paragraphs, easy to read, easy to digest, almost like a movie script. Sometimes those essays tend to do really well, easy to read, easy to follow. And the last point, which is kind of like flair within the essay, is when you are telling a story within a story. So a lot of students try too hard to tell a story, and admissions officers don't have the time for that. But sometimes you get lucky where an essay, you're able to answer it pretty quickly, but you're able to tell a narrative in addition to the answer of that prompt, usually tying in the introduction and the conclusion together. So if that's a story about, a parent or somebody that was influential in your life, and there's a small kind of flair where you're able to tie in that parent, let's say at the front of the essay and at the end, but the essay is actually about you. Those are like super powerful essays because they're fun to read. You know that the student has worked a lot on the essay. It's very thoughtful, and it's still about them, which is, probably the most common mistake I see, which is people write essays about others and they forget to tell the admissions officer, hey, this is actually who I am. So those are some of the examples and the tips and tricks that I've seen in the past.
Awesome. I'll pass it to Bruce and then Francesca.
Okay, I'm going to read the first and last lines from an essay that I think is very good. Begins with, I hesitantly step through the classroom door and prepare for my daily routine. It's gone on long enough that the whole class knows what to expect by now. After attendance, the teacher checks our homework. Everyone can anticipate what I'll say when I'm called on. One of the few meek statements cemented into all their minds, including, but not limited to, I don't have it, I forgot, sorry. So that's the beginning. And where it ends is, the challenges I've gone through allow me to make meaningful art. I'm driven on by the hope that perhaps one day, someone who is like me could see my work and know they are not alone in their struggles and thoughts. And so this is somebody who was struggling with her schoolwork and a number of other issues, and got through it. And what's really nice is that at the opening there, it's a little bit what Ishan said, that with that I statement, I hesitantly stepped through the classroom door. So we're sort of on your side when you're reading something or you're watching a movie. Sometimes there's a character that's pretty bad, and yet you're rooting for that pirate or criminal or something like that. So there's really a natural tendency to want to root for the protagonist. And so I think you sort of take hold of that, even if you're dealing with an issue, and really bring that person in and kind of show your evolution. So through this struggle, then so she overcame the struggle, and then looking forward, what I think is nice is that she brings in this empathy that one day she'll be able to help somebody else who has the same struggle that she does, and that's very nice. And it's all very much about her. As I agree with Ishan also that I had a student this year who started off by giving me a draft he had already written. It was about his grandfather, and it was something he did about his grandfather. But I'm like, great, if your grandfather is applying to Berkeley, then maybe he could submit this essay. But you're the one applying to Berkeley, and so we want to hear a lot more about you. So I think you avoid being around about other people, avoid coming off as not such a nice person, not somebody people would necessarily want to be around. But it's really going in and being real, and a lot of my students, I think, I don't know what the percentage is, but let's just say it's half. They will not show their personal statement to their parents because it is real and it is something very deep inside them that comes out. And I think in general, that's a beautiful thing because they're really talking about who they are and giving the college a sense of who they are. And I think that's what the colleges are looking for. And that's what makes a good essay.
Bruce, thank you for reading that. I feel like it gives a real example of what Ishan was talking about, what I was thinking about, which is this: how do you bring the reader in immediately with something that is action? And I think one of the things that people struggle with a lot with writing personal essays is when they're in this high school mindset of writing essays, regular essays. Those are two very different beasts. And Ishan talked about the screenplay aspect. Bruce, I know you've talked about the storytelling component. It's something that I'm really passionate about as well. And I think, Bruce, what you illustrated was when I hesitantly step across the threshold of the classroom door, we're in the action. We're already there with you. And that's what makes a really powerful opening statement. And I was actually thinking about a personal essay that I was helping a student with, where they also did the same thing. They thrust the reader immediately into the action and then zoomed out. It was sort of, you start really close in and you zoom out to sort of explain what is actually happening. And then you can zoom in again and you can have this effect of zooming in and out. And maybe that's the camera effect in the story that can be really powerful. When I think about things to avoid, I would avoid trying to sum up your life in one essay. I think what is much more powerful is to be able to take a moment, or even within one experience, a moment within that experience, and be able to explain why it was so meaningful to you, as opposed to telling the entirety of your life story.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I remember for my personal statement, I talked about I was a soccer referee, was one of my jobs in high school. So my opening statement was sort of like a quote I heard from a player that was kind of quipping back at the referee, but I do think it's kind of a relatively easy example to follow and good way to get the reader there with you. So all great tips. Another thing that I know some students have questions about in terms of the Common App is a lot of times this is the first time that students are really putting together a resume. And so even though it's only one part of the application, I know it's really important to kind of pack as many things into these extracurricular descriptions as possible. And so Ishan, when you're helping students with this, like what are some things that you recommend?
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is most students want to fill this section out, even with the long tail of activities they did in middle school or they did in elementary school. And I think that's not something right to do, because if I'm looking at a high schooler who's maybe taken, several APs, they play a sport, and they're telling me they do 14 activities, outside. Obviously, I know they're probably doing 2 or 3, and the other 10, maybe they're doing once every 6 months. So kind of resist the urgency to fill out the whole thing, especially if you don't have a lot of activities. Focus on the ones that's about quality over quantity. Focus on the ones that really matter to you. Beyond that, I would say the word count limit comes up with a lot of students. They try to describe the activity in a lot of detail, what it is, and then how they were involved. But usually you don't have enough space for that. So you need to just start with the second, especially if it's well known. If you're doing Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, people already know what that is. So you can just cut to the kind of the meat of it. So this was my involvement. This is how long I've been doing it. This is my main project that got me to, the Eagle Scout. And that's about it. So that's kind of those are my main tips. I guess the last thing I would say is with all students, I try to develop a story or a theme. I call it a thread, which is a combination of activities that link together. And you want to put those threads in order so that they're easy to read and they create a story before they get to your essays. So that's kind of the last tactical thing I do with students on this section.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I would say, just because you want to do everything you can and be really thoughtful about your common application, things like the ordering. Like I remember for me, I made sure to put the activities that like I wanted to highlight the most first. Things like that can all help. For this next question, maybe we'll start with Bruce and then Francesca, if you have anything to add, feel free to. But when you're working with students who maybe don't have the 4.0 GPA and above a 34 on their ACT, and still want to maybe shoot for some of those top schools, how can they work to make their application stand out?
I think showing, so I'm assuming then that somebody is really focused on going to a school for a specific reason. And so it's really showing why you want to be there. It's really knowing the school. It's not being defensive, like, even though I only, you wouldn't necessarily, you don't need to say that. But it's kind of like the same as anything else, but you just need to make a really good case. And I think it was Ishan who said before that you really want to do your research and know the professors, and you really want to give them a sense that you belong there, that you do have the drive to make that difference, and that you belong there. And so that to me is really the thing that will overcome that. And I think they see the numbers, and so but it doesn't mean you can be a little bit lower. That doesn't mean you can't cut it there, right? So it might just be a number that's a little bit lower than somebody else's, but you want to show you can make it there.
Francesca, do you have anything to add here?
Completely agree. I think it's that why us, why this college essay is so important, and being able to be so specific about how you are going to grow, how you're going to be able to take advantage of everything that school has to offer, and how it's going to help you achieve your goals. The more specificity you can give, the better.
No. And yeah, one thing I'll just add here that's more on the tactical side, but I would say if there was a reason that maybe there was a semester or two that your grade suffered for, let's say, extenuating circumstances or personal circumstances, put that in the additional information section too, because if you had one blip and can sort of explain why that's not how you would normally perform as a student, that's something they'll definitely take into consideration too. And to close us off, we'll go through all of the panelists. Maybe we'll go Ishan, Francesca, and then Bruce. But what is one final tip or piece of advice that you would leave these students with when thinking about applying to school?
It's a good question. Take a break before submitting your essays at least one night, sleep on it, and then wake up and read the essay, especially the main ones. So the Common App main essay, maybe your top 2 to 3 key reach schools. Remember not to forget your targets. You need a good list of those and 1 or 2 of the safeties. So have a full list. Most students I recommend apply to 10 or more schools, and take the time on the essays. So don't wait.
Francesca, I'll pass it to you next.
Thanks, Ishan. That recommendation to sleep on it before you submit is so good. I feel like so many of us are just like, oh, it's done. Let me just hit send. And then you realize later there's a typo, or you realize later maybe you could have phrased it a tiny bit differently. So yeah, 100% agree with that. I think it just to come back to a theme that we've been talking about today, it's thinking about you, doing some deep reflection and thinking about what differentiates you. What are your values? Who are you? And having a good understanding of that, and then being able to translate that into the rest of your application.
And I would say be real, be yourself, and be honest, and look more deeply into what, why you want to be there, what you have to offer, and speak in your own voice. I was just working with somebody last week, and we were, it was getting to the point that it was really good and everything was, and he sent me a list of words, like, SAT vocabulary words that he wanted to pepper throughout the essay. So, I said, like, I don't know if it's such a good idea. And then he went and did it, and we of course we took it out, but I'm like, that's not what you sound like. Sound like what you sound like. Be yourself. And so I think that's kind of across the board. I think the best thing to keep in mind.
That's great. And I think just to reiterate what all of you guys have said about being real, really putting forth your values in a genuine way, I would also just say, this process is inherently stressful and time consuming, but at the same time, the process of really reflecting on your life thus far, what are the things you care about? I mean, it's a really good exercise for anyone to do. And so if you can, try to see the process as something that's going to be helpful to you personally beyond just as a means to an end of finishing your common application, because, as you're entering college, you're going to have to continue to think about those things, what you care about, what sort of you want to focus the next portion of your life on. So anyways, I think that was some incredible advice. And I just want to say thank you so much to our incredible panelists. It's clear that not only do they all have a wealth of experience working with students and helping them really craft their story, but they also care deeply about helping students and really through this very important portion of their life. So we're really lucky to have them with us here tonight. And I would just encourage all of you to, if there was something that Bruce, Francesca, or Ishan said that really resonated with you, go log on to Leland or create an account and send them a message and maybe see if you can follow up later and have one of them help you with your college application process. And so just to remind you, we mentioned this before, but everyone that joined this call has access to $25 off of coaching. These are some of the packages offered by our panelists. And yeah, I would say just go sign up for the Leland community to meet other coaches and other undergrads with high school students with the same goal. We also have a wealth of free resources and guides on things like the personal statement, activities list. And yeah, we're excited to help you submit an application that you're really proud of. And so thank you all for joining. Okay, great.